Hello friends. Today we're going to have a nice, chill chat about critique partners. But first, I just want to give everybody a chance to play Critique Partner Matchmaker in the comments. Drop a little bit about you, what you write. I would also suggest leaving an email or an Instagram handle or some way for people to find you that is not YouTube comments, because as I have certainly learned from this channel, YouTube comments sometimes get a little wonky. Sometimes the notifications are weird. Sometimes they don't post. Sometimes they post under a different comment than the one you meant to reply to. But a lot of you have said that you've had a hard time finding critique partners, so I thought the comment section could be a good spot for you to make some connections. And total credit for this idea goes to Maggie Stiefvater, author of The Raven Boys. I saw her do this on her blog back in the day. I think some people found some really good critique partners from it, so I would love to see the same thing happen here. And then you should definitely watch the rest of this video to get my best suggestions on the care and feeding of critique partners. My name is Lydia Foxglove and I am a fantasy author. I have been both traditionally and indie published since 2009, and I just did a video on making writer friends, which led to a lot of discussion on critique partners in particular, so I wanted to get to this topic quickly. There's a lot that goes into a good critique partner relationship, both on the receiving and the giving side. Let's get into it. It is so gloomy out there today. At the kombucha soda again. This one's a cola. It's pretty good. And of course, it came from the discount market, $1.49. It's my splurge. First of all, I know when you're a beginner, especially, I mean, actually forever, but especially when you're a beginner, receiving critiques can be somewhat scary. I mean, it's right there in the name. Critique is related to critical. You're basically asking someone you don't know very well, someone you might not really know, to be critical about your work. Or maybe it's someone you do know, which is not any better. So it can be scary to take that leap. It does not sound fun to say, hello, please be critical of me. And it's not. If you've had enough critique partners, you have had a really not great critique partner in there somewhere. So what I hope to do in this video is to help you avoid being the bad critique partner yourself, and also advise you what to do if you run into one. Okay, so if you're a beginner, and if you're lucky, your first critique partner is actually just a cheerleader, a friend of yours who loves your work and supports you because they love you. They might also be a writer, and you might be fans of each other, just encouraging each other along with your ideas. And this is a very important step. I think sometimes we feel that encouragement is kind of like the equivalent of going to the Thai restaurant and asking for your green curry mild, like kind of wimpy to want encouragement. You should be tough. But encouragement is very important. It's what keeps you going, and it also helps you to know what you're doing well. Where are you connecting? What is it about your work that makes it special? So this encouragement phase is very important, and you shouldn't lose it along the way, even as you get more serious. If you are a critique partner, don't forget to throw in that encouragement. And admittedly, sometimes when you're critiquing a beginning piece of writing, there's not a whole lot to encourage. Often getting the pieces of writing correct are kind of a package deal where you'll kind of have everything wrong in the beginning, and then you'll get better and everything kind of starts to get better collectively. But you should always still try to find whatever the author is doing the best and let them know. This line was pretty funny, or this is a great description, or I really felt for this character right here. Anything you can find that they did well, don't forget to mention it. You may have heard of the sandwich method of critiquing, where you start with something positive, then you fit all the critical stuff in the middle, and then you end with something else that's positive. And I don't think that's ever a bad idea. It does truly help to hear that something was working somewhat. And then sometimes when you get into the later stages, you might think, well, this person knows that they're pretty good. You don't really need to encourage them along. But you still need encouragement at that phase as well, because again, you want to know what really worked. When you're trying to level up as a writer, sometimes knowing what worked the best is actually the best feedback you can get. That's when you know, okay, I really clicked here. I need to make sure that I repeat this performance if at all possible. I'm good at this kind of scene. So encouragement is important. When you're a beginner, it can be hard to even find critique partners if you're not very good. And you're often finding your critique partners in like a group setting where kind of everybody has to critique each other's work. And if you really are a beginner, that is often the best way to get critique, just because you're not trying to make a more personal match at a point where your writing is not really that great. But it also means that your critique partners are less likely to be a good match for you. So there's an awkward period in the beginning where your confidence is a little fragile and you don't yet recognize what is a good critique, what is a bad critique, and yet that is the only kind of critique that you can get oftentimes. As I noted in my video on friends, my earliest critique partners were from local writing groups and from a website called Critique Circle, where you critique several people's work first to build up like credits that then you will get critiques in response after you put in some work yourself. That way it keeps things even. And this website appears to still be around, still function in a similar way, even though like almost 20 years has passed. So kudos to Critique Circle. That's pretty impressive. But I haven't been on it in 20 years. I would assume it's still mostly beginners, but I don't know. This is old experience. But that's a good place to start if you don't have any critique groups in your area and you don't really have like an online group for your genre or that you know to go to. You could always try that first, but you are going to get like a wide variety of critiques. Some of them good, some of them not so much. I don't really remember any of the critiques I got at Critique Circle, but what I do remember is giving critiques at Critique Circle. It was the first time in my life that I had spent hours pondering other people's work, trying to figure out, why is this bad? And that was very eye-opening to me. I had had blinders on as far as my own work up until then, but when I started analyzing other people's work, and thinking, why is this not working? Why is this so boring? Why is this so confusing? It suddenly clicked in my head that I was making a lot of those mistakes as well. And at that point, I actually got off of Critique Circle and really didn't even do much critique for some months. I got a copy of this book, Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, and I spent months with this book and the manuscript that I had, just going through it and line editing it, like paragraph editing it over and over, like almost once for every chapter, just trying to fix all the things that were clunky and weren't working. And after I did this, it was much easier to get critique partners because I leveled up my writing a lot and my writing was a lot more readable. So that's another harsh truth to bear in mind, that if you're having a very hard time finding critique partners, especially anyone to read like a substantial chunk of your book, it might be that you really just need to go back to the craft, that your book is just not very readable. Sometimes silence is a critique in and of itself, I'm sorry to say. So how do you give a good critique? One very common beginner mistake is you look at someone's book and you see that something isn't working and you try to come up with what needs to be done and you end up giving them a bunch of suggestions for rewrites. You end up playing a development editor for this person. If they asked for a development editor, if they said, I'm really stuck, I don't like the way the plot worked out, I need to fix this part. If they asked for that kind of feedback, then, you know, go nuts. But if they didn't, I would not go there. I would just tell the writer, I was confused in this part, I was bored in this part. In fact, just telling people that you were bored or confused is like 50% of a good critique. I mean, bored is a bit of a harsh word, but you know, you can say, the pacing was a little slow here. And then I would let them just sit with that, and they might come back to you and say, well, I've been looking at it and I just can't quite figure out why this isn't working. I would always give the writer the chance to ask you for that kind of feedback before you offer it, because half the time the writer can figure it out for themselves. Before you really know what kind of writer they are, I wouldn't put that kind of work into a critique. A lot of times when I'm reading my books to Dade, he'll be like, oh, hey, I had a thought. And he'll tell me something that he thinks would be really cool, especially if I know something isn't working. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. That's perfect. Other times I'm like, no, 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 no. I don't like that. But you know what? You even bringing that up, now I have a totally different idea. It's almost like the defiance against the idea that I don't like is what spurs the new idea. So those kind of suggestions can be helpful, but only if they are asked for. Don't rewrite the author's book and then argue about it with them when they don't want to do that. Ultimately, it's their book and they're going to have to figure it out for themselves, and they might want to go in a different direction. By the same token, on the author end, if you get a critique like that, or even if you asked for ideas and the person gave you ideas and you don't really like their ideas, you don't have to go through and refute every point they brought up and why you're not going to take their suggestion. You can just say something like, wow, this is great. Thanks for giving me so much to think about. I'm going to look at it and see what I can do. If you have a critique partner that you trust and you have an ongoing relationship with them, that's one thing. Then you might want to explain and think through with them like why that doesn't quite work and what you might be thinking instead. But if this is more of like a first time thing, you don't need to tell them why none of their ideas are good. If you are giving a critique and the line-by-line prose is very rough, again, you don't need to line edit the person's entire manuscript for them. When I'm faced with this, I usually pick out just a couple things that are really glaring and I'll explain in greater depth, like, you know, the reason why this sentence structure doesn't work is because it's kind of passive and, you know, you could tighten it up by writing it this way, and then I do one example. But I don't go through and like line edit every little line when you're dealing with very beginner work. You're mainly just trying to give them that sense of like, this needs some work where line editing is concerned, and hope that you will nudge them to study editing on their own. Because the truth is, if you don't have line editing right, you're not going anywhere. Like if you have one book you want to write, you have like one book that's a piece of local history or the story of your grandfather or something that you want to self-publish. I encounter that sometimes. Then you might be able to just hire someone to polish up that book, make it read better, then you can publish it for your local community or family, etc. But if you want to be a writer, you've got to figure out line editing on your own. You can't hire someone to do all the line editing if you're not already like 90% of the way there. So when you get a piece to critique where every sentence is just kind of a mess, just give them enough to kind of let them know they need to work on that on their own. But beyond that, let's say line by line, they're pretty good. Their prose is pretty good. Now we're getting into the bigger picture stuff. Now you're looking at the work like, am I feeling for these characters? Am I visualizing the setting in my head? Do I find the setting compelling? Is the plot gripping? You know, all that craft stuff. And this is where you're really going to get into differing opinions. I mean, with line editing, occasionally you may get someone who tries to do a lot of line editing and they really don't know what they're talking about. I have occasionally gotten critiques like that, but generally line editing is more about like basic style, grammatical rules. So now we're getting into matters of opinion, matters of style, genre, etc. And I really do recommend doing a fairly deep dive into the basics of craft before you get any critiques. To many of you that will seem very obvious, but there's nothing that's very obvious to like 100% of the people. Read like at least 5 solid craft books cover to cover before you get any critiques. Because this is the part where you're going to get confused sometimes. You're going to get differing opinions, and sometimes you will kind of resonate with a few different opinions and you're going to have to make a decision. Or you might get somebody who really sounds authoritative about what you're doing wrong and you really bristle at it. That's not what you wanted to do, but you find yourself wondering like, are they right? Gosh, they sound like they really know what they're talking about. So the more you kind of know the craft rules and your genre rules and what kind of writer you intend to be, the better you will be at figuring out which critiques are really working. A good critique should always make you feel excited about getting back to work. Well, I mean, like maybe not entirely excited because it can be a lot of work, but it should at least make you feel like, yeah, that is going to make the book better. I hope I can pull it off, but I like it. So in this space, I think it's important to distinguish between like general things that aren't working, that would not work regardless of genre or style. Like a scene just really drags. or you're reading someone's manuscript and you're just glazing. This scene feels like it's going nowhere. You can't tell what is the point of this scene. It doesn't feel like it has any focus. That's something that's going to be pretty universal across every genre. But then you have things that are more of a matter of opinion. Like, do you like this main character? They're a bit of a jerk, but they have an interesting backstory, but like, maybe you don't really like them. That's something you can bring up, like, well, I didn't really like this character, but maybe that's what you're going for. I don't quite know what your intention is with them. You can always suggest, like, what would make you like them more, but it might just be that you're not the audience for the book. If you're reading something that is not your genre or is not your tone, then I don't usually get into as deep of critique because I acknowledge that I just don't really know this genre. I don't know what the readers want. If you read, like, snappy action novels and you suddenly critique someone's like long drawn out epic fantasy, well, you're not going to really know how to critique that. On the flip side, if you're reading something where you are exactly the target audience for it, I usually give a lot more critique because I will tell them, like, I love this kind of book. And then you can bring up kind of references to other books in the genre, like, you know, what you have going on with this character arc kind of reminds me of, you know, X book in this genre. I really liked how that author worked in this theme, you know, you might want to look at that to improve your character's arc. You can bring up some more things that are kind of the language of the genre. Of course, you're still not always going to mesh in the author's intention versus the reader's desire. That's never going to always be an exact match. But if someone is a voracious reader of the genre, it is worth paying a little more attention to, and it is worth critiquing a little deeper. But then you have the middle ground. Like, I was in a critique group with someone who was rating a paranormal romance. I've read a lot of paranormal romance. I know the tropes. I know how a lot of the popular ones read. And this book had a lot of action, very fast paced. It had a lot of talking about how hot the guy was, you know, it had a lot of like people being badasses. It was really not my kind of book. I felt like the characters were kind of shallow. I felt like the world building, I wanted more depth, I wanted more theme, you know, I'm a bit of a deeper reader. But at the same time, because I have read a lot of paranormal romance, I knew that this book would probably please a lot of paranormal romance readers. It was just like fluffy fun. It was well written, and there's definitely an audience for that. So when I gave a critique, I made sure to distinguish between, like, well, this part's a little confusing, or I really would love to hear a little bit more about how the world building works in this part because it would make sense, you know, later. Those kind of like craft things. Versus my opinions of, like, personally, I would like to see more character development. Personally, I wish you would dig into this theme a little more. But I also think it could sell if you don't do those things. And indeed, this book did sell. It was never going to be a book that I was going to adore, but I knew enough about it to acknowledge that, like, my opinion is not the be-all end-all of what's going to sell. And it's important to remember that on the receiving end as well. Like, objectively, we all know that just looking at, like, the 100 most popular books of all time, you have so many different kinds of books. No one's going to like that entire list. Someone's favorite book of all time is someone else's, like, being forced to read that in English class was the greatest torture of my life. There's so many different opinions. Like, objectively, we know that. But when it comes to our books, we can often get caught in this trap of, I have to please everybody. This person hated it, and that's all I can think of. I have to fix it so that this person will like it. No. You have to try to detach yourself from that personal feeling and know that no book is going to please everyone, and you have to please the people that you are your audience, that you most respect, that you most want to read your book. Like, if I turn on my YouTube feed right now, I watch a fair amount of booktube videos, and I am going to see a bunch of videos about how terrible Colleen Hoover and Fourth Wing are. I don't even watch a lot of negative videos, but the algorithm loves those videos, so they always show them to me. They probably show them to you too. And they're right. I don't really like Colleen Hoover or the Fourth Wing, but I can guarantee that if Colleen Hoover and Rebecca Yarros rewrote their books to please me, they would not be bestsellers anymore. I am not their audience. So try to bear in mind as you are getting critiques, to what degree is this person my audience? And if they're not your audience at all, and their critique does not vibe with you, try to let it go, even if it's getting under your skin. But yes, circling back to the paranormal romances that I don't really like, and I've actually had a few critique partners who wrote paranormal romances that seemed very commercial, but that I didn't really like that much. But I do know enough about the genre to distinguish that. Just remember that every author has a tendency to get very much in their head, so it is good to distinguish between your opinion versus something that really does feel like their craft could be improved in a universal sense. I think it helps writers distinguish whether or not to take a critique seriously versus someone who just really comes down hard and says, man, this was not working for me. This was not working for me. And then if they don't take any of your critique, as I said, just let it go. You should never pressure anyone into taking your critique, even if you feel deep down in your gut that you are very right about it. They need to come to that conclusion themselves. Don't start thinking about your critique partners as like projects, people you need to take under your wing and mentor and help. If you just met this person, or this is just like the teenager that joined your critique group, don't come down too hard on them. They need to figure these things out for themselves. And I've been on the receiving end of this, the person who was really hammering on me to take their suggestions, and they just didn't resonate with me. And like, in some cases, it took me years to understand what the book needed. So in a sense, they were right. The book needed something, but it was never what they suggested, and I had to come to that conclusion myself. Another frustrating situation is when you're in a critique group and you have a critique partner who is just really bad. You don't even know where to begin. In this case, there are a few things I try to bear in mind. One, you don't have to fix everything. I know I've been hammering on this point, but don't overwhelm them. Just pick a few things and let them work with those. Two, it can feel like a waste of your time, but it's not. You're still sharpening your own editorial skills. You're still analyzing, why is this really not working? How could it work better? Using those muscles is never bad, but it is an argument for always when you're in a general critique group and anyone could join, or you don't know the people. Keep the pieces very short. You really don't want to get stuck editing many pages of something that is really rough. Don't commit to any huge critiques until you've seen just a page or two, and then if you're liking the writing and it seems like your thing, then you can proceed to a longer piece from there. And the third thing I try to remember is sometimes when you get something to critique that seems really bad, it can feel like, this is hopeless. This person is never going to get anywhere. But it's not always true. I have seen people improve very rapidly. There is a certain level, admittedly, where something is so strange and incoherent and every piece of it is just so off from what it needs to be that it's true. That probably isn't going anywhere. I hate to say it. And if you're worried that you are that person, you're probably not, because whenever I've met those people, they don't usually study the craft at all, and they always seem like very oblivious. So they're probably not watching this video. It's probably not you. But there is a tiny percentage in any large pool where the writing is just, it's really a mess. But there's also the book that's like, it's just kind of bad. But then the person improves very quickly. They take the advice to heart. They really work on it. They improve a lot. That's very gratifying when you run into that person. One of my earliest critique partners was somebody that I met cold on a message board. We exchanged our books, and the book I sent her was not very good. It was like my first real novel. The book she sent me, I'm pretty sure she would agree, was not very good either. And if you just looked at us objectively, you would probably think, I don't know if either of these people are going anywhere. But within just a few years, we didn't even stay critique partners, by the way, but within just a few years, she had a publishing deal, and then I had a publishing deal, and we both stayed in the game this whole time. I've written many books since. After that first critique exchange we had, I assumed she probably had other critique partners and she kept working on her craft. Same for me. We both got way better very quickly and became full-time writers. So sometimes that happens. So you're probably going to start out with a big random selection of critique partners, some of whom are not the best for various reasons, not the best fit for you at least. And then if you're lucky, you're going to meet people that you click with. They give you good critique, you give them good critique, you like what each other is writing, you communicate and understand what each person is trying to get to and help help each other achieve it. But you always want to start out small with just a couple pages and not pouring an intense amount of time into critiquing someone's work until you know if it's a good fit for you. If it does seem like you can proceed to a more intimate partnership, even then I would probably just do the first 50 pages to start. Honestly, so often all you need is a critique of the first 50 pages. People think you need a critique of the whole book. Almost all the problems appear in the first 50 pages. That is not to say that you never need a full manuscript critique, but generally there is a hint of what's going to go wrong in the first 50 pages. And when I get near the end of a book, I'm not looking for like a broad critique as much as I'm looking for someone that I trust a lot to talk through, like, I'm struggling with the end of the book. I'm not really sure if I like how the ending worked out because, you know, X character has been through this whole journey and then this happens. You know, when you get to full manuscript stage, that's where I want someone that I really trust and I know that I can really get into a conversation about something with them. So I really hope that a few of you find your perfect critique partner right here in the comments of this YouTube video. You could also join my $5 Patreon tier and get access to my Discord where my Patreons are starting to form critique groups, and we talk about a lot of different aspects of the craft in general on there. But as always, I deeply appreciate each and every one of you for being here, and if you have a horror story about a critique partner that you want to share, or a really great experience with a critique partner, I mean, the horror stories are usually more entertaining. Or if you have any other advice that I didn't think of on how to be a good critique partner, you know what to do. Drop it in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!